Oh, great. Another rotation cycle, another mandatory cultural exchange initiative forced upon us by the Galactic Education Council. I, Professor Klaxx'nar, Senior Lecturer of Interstellar Diplomacy at the esteemed Galactic Academy of Zorblax, am once again saddled with a human. Yes, a human. The newest addition to our prestigious halls that have educated 12 galactic presidents and 17 supreme commanders, I might add. Professor Klaxx'nar, this is Olivia Barnes, our exchange student from Earth. Principal Wirtz AAA introduced the small, fleshy creature standing in my doorway. She smiled with those peculiar lip formations. No spines, no luminescent patches, not even proper pigmentation that shifted with emotional states. Just two eyes, a cluster of facial features, and that ridiculous mop of protein filaments sprouting from her cranium. A brown, I believe they call it? Such a mundane color. How absolutely thrilling, I replied, my neck sacs deflating with the exhalation of pure sarcasm. Tell me, Principal Wirtz AA, does this one at least understand basic quantum mechanics? The last Earth specimen could barely grasp four-dimensional calculus. The human, Olivia, shifted her weight from one lower appendage to another. Actually, Professor, I have dual majors in astrophysics and cultural anthropology back at Cambridge. I've read all 7 volumes of your thesis on non-linear diplomatic progressions during the Third Centaurian conflict. Well, she speaks, and apparently reads. Fascinating. She scored highly on her entrance exams, Wirtz AA said, antennae twitching with what I recognized as smugness. Higher than some of our Pelorian students. I ruffled my dorsal ridges in annoyance. We shall see. Theory and practice are separated by parsecs of competence, Principal. As Wirtz AA slithered away, I directed the human to an empty seat at the back of my lecture hall. My 6 eyes tracked her awkward gait as she navigated between the varied seating arrangements designed for 17 different species types. The other students watched her with reactions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. The Taraxians, with their hive-mind neural network, buzzed disapprovingly. The Novari delegation shifted further away, their crystalline exoskeletons reflecting light in patterns that clearly communicated discomfort. Only Garblethorpe, a third-year Ventusian, offered a friendly oscillation of his gas bladders in her direction. Settle down, class, I commanded, activating the holographic projection system. Today we continue our analysis of the Great Akkadian Proxima diplomatic crisis of stellar year 7623. I couldn't help but notice how the Akkadian students and the Proxima students immediately tensed. Their ancient rivalry had been relatively dormant for several generations, but recent news of boundary disputes in the Cygnus sector had rekindled old tensions. Even here, in our supposedly neutral academic setting, the political climate of the wider galaxy infiltrated like background radiation. Professor? A sharp, metallic voice interrupted my thoughts. Jax Till, the Akkadian representative, raised 3 of his sensory stalks. Will we be discussing the recent allegations of Proxima mining operations in disputed territories? Before I could respond, Lorale 9, the Proxima delegation leader, emitted a high-pitched frequency of indignation. Those territories were never disputed until your high command fabricated historical claims. Fabricated? The star charts from 9 millennia ago clearly show. Enough. My voice boomed through all 6 of my speech organs simultaneously. This is precisely the kind of emotionally charged rhetoric that has no place in academic discourse. From the corner of my primary vision field, I noticed the human, Olivia, watching intently, scribbling notes with primitive manual recording implements. How quaint. What could a species that had barely managed interplanetary travel possibly contribute to discussions of conflict spanning multiple star systems? Humans. Always observing, cataloging, analyzing. As if understanding would somehow compensate for their biological, technological, and cultural inferiority. Little did I know that in exactly 6 standard cycles, this particular human would prove me catastrophically wrong. For your midterm assessment, I announced to my class 3 cycles later you will participate in an interspecies diplomacy simulation. My tentacle appendages swept dramatically across the holographic display, revealing the project parameters. Several students squirmed with anticipation in their various forms of seating apparatus. You will divide into 8 delegations, representing the major galactic powers. Each group must negotiate a peaceful resolution to the Cygnus Resource Allocation Treaty. And yes, I added, noting the sudden ripple of discomfort, I am deliberately assigning you to represent powers that may conflict with your own species' origins. That is precisely the point of diplomatic training. The class erupted into a cacophony of protests, exclamations, and in the case of the gaseous Flobian students, alarmed expulsions of noxious fumes. Professor Klaxx'nar. The Akkadian student Jax Till vibrated his speaking membranes at an unnecessarily high volume. Surely you cannot expect me to represent Proxima interests. My third progenitor was dissolved in the massacre of Taurus Major. And my ancestral memory cube contains direct recordings of Akkadian destruction during the 5th solar expansion. Lorale 9 countered, her metallic appendages clicking with agitation. I exhaled slowly through my anterior breathing sacs. And this, students, is exactly why you need this exercise. Real diplomacy isn't conducted between friends. It's negotiated between adversaries who must find common ground despite their differences. Now, the groupings are final. The delegation assignments appeared on everyone's personal data terminals. As expected, chaos ensued as students reluctantly shuffled toward their assigned sections of the lecture hall. And there, standing alone in the center, looking at her terminal with that peculiar human expression furrowed upper face protrusions above their visual organs, was Olivia Barnes. "Problem, Earth student?" I asked, not bothering to conceal my exasperation. I don't seem to have a group assignment, Professor." I flicked through my roster with 2 of my manipulator appendages while maintaining eye contact with all 6 of my visual organs. Ah, yes. With 47 students and 8 delegations, there must be one uneven group. You will serve as an independent consultant. Consider yourself fortunate. You can observe without the burden of representing interests beyond your comprehension. The human's face did that strange color-changing thing, turning slightly more pink. Fascinating how their epidermis betrays their emotional states in such a primitive, uncontrollable fashion. "Yes, Professor." Over the next several days, I observed with increasing amusement as the human attempted to integrate herself into the diplomatic simulation. She approached every delegation, offering her services as a consultant, carrying that archaic-bound collection of paper sheets she called a notebook. Most groups tolerated her presence briefly before dismissing her with various degrees of politeness. The human persisted, however. Each day she arrived earlier, left later, and consumed what appeared to be bitter plant extract stimulants that made her speak at increasingly rapid rates. "You know," she said to the Medusan delegation one morning, waving her beverage container with alarming enthusiasm, "Earth went through something similar with the Antarctic Treaty. Multiple nations claiming the same territory, resource disputes, scientific interests." "Earth has no space colonies," interrupted Drelk, the Medusan representative, his eye stalks swiveling dismissively. "Your planet barely manages unity among your own species. What could you possibly contribute to discussions of galactic-scale diplomacy?" I couldn't help but emit a small, satisfying buzz of agreement from my secondary vocal chamber. The human was, if nothing else, persistent in the face of rejection. A curious trait. Inefficient but curious. Most peculiar was her habit of doodling, creating primitive visual representations with her manual recording implement during intense negotiations. When asked about this seemingly disrespectful behavior, she claimed it helped her think. How a species could evolve to require physical distraction to enable mental focus remained one of the many baffling human contradictions. By the 9th cycle, the simulation was progressing with surprising effectiveness. The student groups had moved past their initial discomfort and were engaging in substantive negotiations. The Acadians and Proxima delegations had even reached a preliminary agreement on shared patrol rights in disputed territories. Perhaps there was hope for this generation of diplomats after all. That's when everything changed. It began with a series of urgent notifications simultaneously lighting up every student's communication device. The loud chiming created a disorienting symphony of alerts throughout the lecture hall. Even my own faculty communicator vibrated against my tertiary limb. Professor Garblethorpe, the Ventusian, expanded his gas bladders in distress. The Acadian fleet has opened fire on Proxima mining stations in the actual Cygnus sector. Before I could process this information, the Acadian and Proxima students leapt to their appendages, sing off across the room in postures that required no translation across species barriers, aggression, accusation, hostility. Your government has violated the ceasefire. Lorale 9's metallic voice had shifted to a higher, more threatening register. Your illegal mining operations left us no choice. Jax Till's sensory stalks were fully extended in battle display. Within moments, the carefully constructed diplomatic simulation had collapsed into chaos as students rapidly aligned themselves with their species' actual alliances. What had been academic role-play moments before was now deadly serious. The Galactic News Network confirmed that the long-standing tensions had erupted into actual armed conflict. Through the chaos, I spotted the human, Olivia, standing perfectly still in the center of the room, clutching her primitive notebook. For once, she wasn't trying to insert herself into any group. Instead, she was watching, observing, with an expression that, even to my non-human perception, looked surprisingly calculating. Perhaps even dangerous. The Academy emergency containment protocols activated with a deafening siren. Metal barriers slammed down over windows and doorways as the building's security system detected the escalating conflict. What moments ago had been a prestigious educational institution was now, effectively, a battlefield. This facility is now under lockdown, announced the automated security system. All students returned to designated safe zones immediately. No one moved. The diplomatic simulation had transformed into something far more dangerous, reality. You heard the system, I shouted, my voice projecting from all 6 of my vocal chambers simultaneously. This is still an academic institution, not a war zone. Jax Till, the Acadian representative, swiveled his eye stalks toward me with cold calculation. With respect, Professor, this facility now represents the only neutral diplomatic ground within 12 parsecs, and it contains representatives from all major galactic powers. The implication was clear: our classroom had just become a strategic asset. The Proxima Collective demands the immediate surrender of all Acadian-aligned students, Lorale 9 announced, her metallic appendages reconfiguring into what was unmistakably a defensive formation. Before I could intervene, chaos erupted. Students scrambled in every direction, forming alliances based on ancient treaties and current political alignments. The classroom furniture became makeshift barricades. Personal communication devices were repurposed as signal jammers. One particularly resourceful Medusan student converted their environmental adaptation suit into what appeared to be a short-range paralysis field generator. This is absolutely unacceptable, I bellowed, but my authority had evaporated faster than water on the fire plains of Nexus 6. Within minutes, the lecture hall had been divided into fortified territories. The most alarming development came when Drelk, the Medusan student, emerged dragging a terrified Ventusian. "We have secured a hostage from the Ventusian Proxima Alliance," he announced. "Any aggressive action will result in consequences to this gaseous life form." Poor Garblethorpe's gas bladders were deflated in terror. Not to be outdone, the opposing faction quickly captured a crystalline Nubian student aligned with the Acadians. The escalation was happening with frightening speed. I attempted to reach the exit, planning to alert Academy security, only to find myself suddenly yanked backward by a powerful gravitational manipulation field. I found myself unceremoniously deposited in what had once been the refreshment nook, now converted to a neutral zone between the two main opposing factions. "You will serve as mediator, Professor," Jax Till informed me, all three of his sensory stalks pointed at my central eye cluster. "Your expertise in the Third Centaurian conflict makes you uniquely qualified." "This is outrageous. I am your instructor, not a—" "The alternative," interrupted Lorali 9, "is that we classify you as an enemy combatant." Wonderful. I was now a prisoner in my own classroom. Through the chaos I spotted the human, Olivia Barnes, attempting to negotiate safe passage across the battle line. The Akkadian sentry gestured dismissively with his upper appendages. "This conflict doesn't concern primitive species," I overheard him saying. "Return to your corner, human. Your planet isn't even recognized in the Galactic Council." The human's face contorted into an expression I couldn't quite identify. Not fear nor anger, but something calculating. She retreated without argument, moving to the periphery of the chaos where she began scribbling furiously in her primitive notebook. All sides had dismissed her as irrelevant to the unfolding crisis. A sensible assessment, I thought at the time. What could a representative of a species that had barely mastered interplanetary travel possibly contribute to a conflict with roots deeper than Earth's entire recorded history? As I watched rival student factions transforming personal technology into improvised weapons, establishing communication blockades, and fortifying positions throughout my classroom, I realized with grim certainty this was no longer an academic exercise. My students were prepared to fight a proxy war with real consequences. And I was trapped right in the middle of it, along with one very quiet, very observant human who nobody was paying any attention to. That, as it turned out, was their first mistake. 3 hours into our impromptu hostage crisis, the situation had deteriorated further. The Akkadian faction had seized control of the environmental controls, threatening to adjust atmospheric composition to levels toxic to silicon-based life forms. The Proxima Coalition responded by barricading the nutrition dispensers. Even the normally peaceful Florians had joined the fray, using their photosynthetic abilities to create localized oxygen-rich pockets that left non-plant species lightheaded and disoriented. From my forced neutral zone position, I observed with growing alarm as my students, some of the brightest minds in the galaxy, reverted to primitive territorial instincts. My 6 eyes constantly scanned the room, monitoring the escalating tensions, when something unusual caught my attention. The human, Olivia Barnes, was crawling through the narrow maintenance duct that ran alongside the lecture hall's primary waste recycling system. A passage specifically designed for maintenance drones, not bipedal life forms. "What in the 7 moons of praxis is she doing?" I muttered to myself. My question was answered moments later when she emerged on the opposite side of the room, behind the Akkadian barricade, completely undetected. With remarkable stealth for such an ungainly species, she retrieved something from the supply cabinet, nothing valuable, just a simple roll of adhesive binding material that humans called tape. Then, just as quietly, she disappeared back into the maintenance duct. 10 minutes later, she repeated this maneuver, this time infiltrating the Proxima territory to recover what appeared to be a handful of light refraction prisms from the optics lab storage. Pointless scavenging, I concluded. What could she possibly accomplish with such primitive materials? Over the next hour, I watched with increasing bewilderment as Olivia systematically bypassed supposedly impenetrable barriers, circumvented detection systems, and acquired an odd assortment of seemingly random items, reflective emergency blankets, components from disassembled learning terminals, even the decorative plant from my desk. Most baffling was her method. Rather than using technological solutions, the obvious approach any sensible species would employ, she relied on purely physical adaptations, squeezing through tight spaces by contorting her flexible frame, timing movements to coincide with distractions. using her limited height to advantage by staying beneath sensor ranges calibrated for taller species. "You watching the human, Professor?" Jax Till asked, noticing my fixated gaze. "Amusing, isn't it? Like observing a primitive attempting to understand quantum entanglement." "Yes, amusing," I replied, though something about her methodical approach suggested a pattern I couldn't quite identify. The pattern became clear approximately 20 minutes later when the lights in the eastern quadrant of the room suddenly failed. The Proxima faction, heavily dependent on photonic energy, immediately redirected resources to investigate. While they were distracted, a series of reflective flashes appeared on the western wall, some sort of crude visual signal that sent the Akkadian sentries rushing to defend against a non-existent breach. And there, slipping between the gaps in defenses, was Olivia, making her way straight toward the captive Ventusian, Garblethorpe. "Impossible," I whispered. "She's created a tactical diversion using nothing but reflective surfaces and manipulated lighting." Before any faction could respond, Olivia had reached Garblethorpe, whispered something to him, and guided him toward yet another maintenance access point I hadn't even known existed. "Stop the human," bellowed Drelk, the Medusan captor, but it was too late. Both Olivia and the Ventusian hostage had vanished. "But how?" demanded Lorale 9, her metallic appendages clicking in agitation. "Our sensors detected no technological assistance." "That's precisely why it worked," I realized aloud. "You were looking for technological solutions while she used, what did humans call it? Thinking outside the container?" "Box," came Olivia's voice from somewhere in the ceiling. "The expression is thinking outside the box, Professor." The room erupted in confusion as faction leaders demanded explanations from their security teams. I found myself experiencing an unfamiliar sensation, what humans might call impressed. 7 minutes later, the confusion doubled when the captive Nubian student from the opposing faction also mysteriously disappeared during another series of inexplicable system malfunctions. "She's applying primitive Earth battle tactics," I realized with growing astonishment. "Guerrilla warfare, I believe they call it. Acting unpredictably, attacking weaknesses, refusing to engage in direct confrontation." Most fascinating was how thoroughly it confused my students. The advanced species in the room operated on logic, probability, and established protocols. They simply couldn't predict actions that defied logical risk assessment. Olivia was taking routes considered too dangerous, making alliances considered too tenuous, and employing strategies considered too simplistic to be viable. And yet, they were working. "Has anyone seen that human movie where they rescue hostages?" Olivia's voice echoed from somewhere indeterminate. "Die difficult? Die intensely?" Something like that. The faction leaders exchanged confused glances. "I've reviewed significant portions of human entertainment archives," offered one of the Akkadian students. "Their fictional conflict resolutions frequently involve improbable tactics and inappropriate humor during crisis situations." "Exactly." Olivia's voice responded from a different location entirely. "Now who wants to negotiate? I've got both hostages, 2 emergency beacons, and control of the ventilation system. Plus, I found the snack cabinet. Anyone hungry?" In that moment, watching the most advanced young minds in the galaxy thoroughly confounded by one human with adhesive tape and obscure movie references, I experienced another new sensation. The disturbing realization that perhaps, just perhaps, I had underestimated the creative potential of less technologically advanced species. "All faction representatives to the central podium," Olivia's voice rang out through the lecture hall's communication system. "I've arranged a ceasefire negotiation." Over the next several minutes, reluctant faction leaders converged on what had once been my teaching platform. Now it resembled the aftermath of a small, localized supernova. The Akkadian leader, Jax Till, approached from the east, flanked by his most trusted lieutenants. Lorale 9 of the Proxima Collective advanced from the west, her metallic appendages still partially configured for defensive capabilities. I was escorted to the negotiation area as well, my role as neutral mediator apparently still required. The atmosphere crackled with tension thick enough to register on gravitational sensors. And there, sitting cross-legged atop my lectern, munching on a nutrition bar clearly pilfered from the faculty lounge, was Olivia Barnes. The human student whom everyone had dismissed was now, inexplicably, controlling the room. "Welcome to Peace Talks, everyone. Please, grab a snack. I've arranged quite the spread." She gestured to an assortment of food items she'd somehow collected from around the building. Nothing builds bridges like breaking bread together. It's a human saying. Though I notice none of you actually have bread on your home worlds, which is honestly a serious culinary oversight. The faction leaders stared at her in confused silence. "Is this some form of psychological warfare?" Jax Till finally asked, his sensory stalks quivering with suspicion. "Nope. Just good old-fashioned diplomacy with a human twist," Olivia replied cheerfully. "Now, I've taken the liberty of drafting a preliminary agreement based on what I've overheard from both sides during my, let's call it, reconnaissance." She produced her notebook and began reading terms that addressed the core concerns of both factions with surprising accuracy. Resource sharing protocols, security guarantees, mutual oversight mechanisms, all presented with a casual directness that bordered on diplomatic sacrilege by galactic standards. "This is highly irregular," Lorale 9 objected, her voice modulator shifting to a frequency indicating deep discomfort. "Diplomatic negotiations require formal procedures, ceremonial exchanges, and properly certified mediators." "Yeah, about that." Olivia set down her notebook. "Did you know that one of Earth's most significant peace treaties was negotiated by a man who was literally intoxicated on fermented grape juice? The Treaty of Versailles, look it up. Or how the Dayton Accords were hammered out in a location humans use for temporary sleeping while traveling. We call it a motel, not even a proper diplomatic venue." I found myself leaning forward, genuinely intrigued. "Are you suggesting that formal diplomatic structures are unnecessary?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes they get in the way," Olivia replied. "Humans learned that the hard way. We spent millennia killing each other over whose ceremonial procedures should take precedence, whose gods were correct, whose bloodlines were superior. Eventually we figured out that empathy and practical problem-solving matter more than protocol." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "Your species nearly destroyed itself multiple times," Drelk observed, his eye stalks narrowing. "Hardly a model for diplomatic excellence." "Exactly," Olivia exclaimed, surprising everyone. "We're experts at nearly destroying ourselves, then pulling back from the brink. We've practiced it more than any species in this room. You all achieved interstellar travel before you had to face extinction-level threats from your own actions. We weren't so lucky." She stood up now, her small human frame somehow commanding attention. "Your peoples are on the verge of war over mineral rights in a sector with thousands of similar mineral-rich systems. Is that worth dying for? Is that worth killing for?" Because we humans have a lot of experience asking those questions, and I can tell you that the answer is almost always no. For a moment, the tension in the room shifted from hostility to something else, contemplation, perhaps. Then a communication alert chimed on multiple devices simultaneously. "The Akkadian fleet has commenced orbital bombardment of Proxima Station 12, someone announced. The room erupted into chaos. Accusations flew. Defensive postures resumed. Improvised weapons reappeared. "Enough," Olivia shouted, her voice cutting through the tumult with surprising force. "This is exactly when maintaining dialogue matters most." "Dialogue is over," Jax Till declared, his voice cold. "Now only strength will decide." Olivia looked at him, then at Lorale 9, then at me. In that moment I witnessed something unexpected in her expression, not fear, not anger, but profound determination. She pulled something from her pocket, a small, primitive Earth communication device. "Then I guess it's time for Plan B," she said quietly. Plan B, as it turned out, involved broadcasting our entire classroom standoff to every major news network in the galaxy. "I've been live streaming everything since the lockdown started," Olivia explained as faction leaders stared at her in horror. "Every threat, every demand, every hostage situation, all transmitted directly to the public information channels across 27 systems." She held up her primitive Earth device, using this to uplink to the Academy's emergency beacon network. "Turns out your security protocols have a loophole. They never accounted for technology so obsolete it bypasses modern firewalls entirely." A remarkable silence fell across the room as the implications became clear. The student factions weren't just representing their governments, they had effectively become their governments in the public eye. Their actions in this classroom were now inextricably linked to the political narratives unfolding across the galaxy. "Public opinion is already shifting," Olivia continued, scrolling through her device. "Civilian populations on both sides are questioning why diplomatic alternatives weren't attempted before military action. Several neutral systems are calling for immediate ceasefire." What happened next defied all my expectations of interspecies relations. The faction leaders, faced with this unprecedented transparency, began talking. Not posturing, not threatening, genuinely communicating. Lorale 9's metallic appendages reconfigured from defensive to neutral stance. Jax Teal's sensory stalks relaxed from their aggressive extension. Within hours, our classroom crisis had catalyzed actual diplomatic movement in the wider conflict. Reports came in of military forces standing down, of preliminary talks being scheduled. All because one human student understood something the rest of us had overlooked: that accountability to ordinary citizens is sometimes more powerful than military might. When the Academy security forces finally overrode the lockdown protocols on the third day, they found not a war zone but a functioning diplomatic conference. Student representatives had drafted a comprehensive framework for resource sharing in the disputed territories, one that their home governments were now seriously considering. Professor Klaxx'nar, Principal Verts AAA, addressed me during the formal inquiry that followed. "Your class project seems to have had unexpected outcomes." "Indeed," I replied, my neck sacs inflating slightly with what I reluctantly recognized as pride. "It appears we have all learned something about diplomatic innovation." The Academy awarded Olivia Barnes the prestigious Zorblax Medal for interspecies understanding, the first time in its 9,000-year history that such an honor had been bestowed upon a representative of a non-council species. When I congratulated her after the ceremony, she responded with that peculiar facial gesture humans call a smile. "Thank you, Professor. I was just applying what I've learned from human history." Sometimes the most powerful diplomatic tool is forcing everyone to see the consequences of their choices. I find myself now, at the end of this academic cycle, completely reevaluating my position on humans as a species. Their technological development may lag centuries behind galactic standards. Their physical forms may lack elementary adaptations like proper exoskeletons or multiple sensory organs, but their capacity for lateral problem-solving and empathetic mediation is remarkable. Olivia Barnes has been invited to join the Galactic Council's newly formed Human Perspectives Advisory Committee. Apparently, several major powers have recognized the value of what they're calling human-style crisis management. I have revised my curriculum for next cycle to include a full unit on Earth diplomatic history. My colleagues think I've gone slightly nebulous in my cognitive functions, but I stand firm in my assessment. Sometimes the most primitive approach turns out to be the most advanced. And sometimes a species we dismiss as barely spacefaring turns out to understand the fundamentals of peace better than those who have traveled between stars for millennia. She was just a human exchange student, until she changed the way we think about diplomacy itself.